Imagine walking into one of the most prestigious hotels in the country, only to be laughed at because of your appearance. The hostile stares, the barely concealed whispers, the mocking glances. That's exactly what happened to Harold Jenkins one fateful Tuesday morning at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Harold's worn work boots left slight traces of farmland soil with each step. His weathered hands, calloused from 50 years of honest labor, clutched a simple leather portfolio containing documents worth more than the luxury vehicles parked outside. Yet all anyone saw was an old man in faded overalls, out of place amidst the tailored suits and designer dresses that filled the opulent lobby. The smirks from the staff behind the polished reception desk told the whole story. They had already judged him, categorized him, dismissed him. Little did they know that the man they were so casually disrespecting owned more than just a modest farm on the outskirts of town. Harold Jenkins had built an agricultural empire through decades of innovation and perseverance. His name meant nothing to them now, but by the end of the day, they would never forget it. This is a story about appearance versus reality, about the dangerous assumptions we make when we evaluate worth based on clothing rather than character. And it's about the moment when those who judge learn the truth about the power that can hide behind humble appearances. Harold Jenkins rose before dawn, as he had done every day for the past 57 years. At 72, his body moved a bit slower than it once did, but his mind remained as sharp as the day he purchased his first 5 acres with money saved from 3 jobs. The soft golden light of morning filtered through the simple curtains of his farmhouse. The same house his father had built with his own hands in 1952. His routine never varied. A simple breakfast of toast and black coffee, then a gentle pat on the head for his aging border collie, Rusty. The dog no longer accompanied him on his morning walks around the property, but still waited faithfully by the door each morning. "Just checking on things before the big meeting, old friend," Harold murmured as he laced up his work boots. Not his best pair, but the comfortable ones with the stitching he'd repaired himself last winter. Harold's appearance told the story of his life. His hands were maps of hard work, calloused, weathered, with soil embedded so deeply beneath his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove it entirely. His face, tanned and lined from decades under the sun, carried the quiet dignity of a man who had built something meaningful from nothing. Silver hair, cut simply by the same local barber for 40 years, framed intelligent blue eyes that missed nothing. For today's meeting, he had chosen his good overalls, still worn at the knees, but clean and without the tractor grease stains that marked his everyday pair. A faded blue work shirt, freshly ironed by his own hand, completed the ensemble. Many years ago, his late wife Margaret had tried to convince him to buy a suit, but Harold had gently refused. "A man ought to look like who he is," he'd told her. Who Harold Jenkins was, however, extended far beyond what his appearance suggested. The modest 12 acres he had started with had expanded to over 12,000. His innovative irrigation techniques had revolutionized drought-resistant farming across 3 states. The agricultural patents he'd developed had recently sold to an international conglomerate for a sum that would have made his father's head spin. Yet Harold lived simply. The windfall from the patents sat mostly untouched in various accounts and investments, managed by the same local bank where he'd opened his first account as a teenager. His farmhouse remained unassuming, though he'd added modern conveniences for comfort. His most extravagant purchase had been the education of his grandchildren and a comfortable retirement home for his sister. As Harold climbed into his 15-year-old pickup truck, he checked his leather portfolio one last time. Inside were the documents confirming his recent acquisition, a controlling interest in the Luxon Hospitality Group, owners of the Grand Plaza hotel chain. It was the first step in a new direction for his wealth, investing in businesses that could benefit from the practical wisdom he'd accumulated over a lifetime. The drive into the city took nearly 2 hours. Harold watched as rural landscapes gradually gave way to suburbs and finally the gleaming towers of downtown. He'd made reservations at the Grand Plaza for practical reasons. His meeting with the board of directors would take place in their conference room, and at his age, he appreciated the convenience of staying on site. As he pulled his truck into the circular driveway of the Grand Plaza, Harold noticed the momentary confusion on the valet's face. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance, sleek European sedans and gleaming SUVs with prices that could have purchased small farms. "I can park it myself, son," Harold said kindly, noting the young man's relief. He followed directions to the self-parking area, gathered his small overnight bag and portfolio, and made his way toward the hotel's grand entrance. His boots, practical for the light rain that had fallen earlier, made soft squelching sounds against the polished concrete. Harold paused for a moment, taking in the soaring glass facade of the hotel. For a brief instant, he felt a flicker of self-consciousness, an unusual sensation for a man so comfortable in his own skin. Then he squared his shoulders and pushed through the revolving doors into the gleaming lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, unaware of the reception that awaited him, with crystal chandeliers. Fresh flower arrangements, each worth more than a week's groceries, perfumed the air from polished pedestals. Guests in tailored business attire and designer casual were moved with the assured confidence of those accustomed to such surroundings. Into this refined atmosphere stepped Harold Jenkins, his worn work boots leaving faint traces of soil on the immaculate floor. The portfolio tucked under his arm contained documents worth millions, but his appearance, the faded overalls, weather-beaten face, and calloused hands, immediately marked him as an outsider. The first sign of trouble came from a pair of young executives seated in plush armchairs near the entrance. Their conversation halted mid-sentence as Harold passed. One nudged the other, poorly concealing a smirk behind his hand. "Think he took a wrong turn looking for the feed store?" The comment, though whispered, carried clearly in the marble acoustics. Harold pretended not to hear. In 72 years of life, he'd learned which battles were worth fighting. He approached the front desk, where 3 receptionists in immaculate uniforms assisted guests with practiced smiles and polished efficiency. The central figure behind the desk was a young man in his early 30s with perfectly styled hair and a name tag identifying him as Blake Thompson, front office manager. He was engaged with a woman in a business suit, his manner attentive and deferential. Harold waited patiently at the side, portfolio tucked under his arm. After completing the transaction, Blake's eyes swept the desk area, passing over Harold completely before landing on a well-dressed couple who had just arrived behind him. "Welcome to the Grand Plaza. How may I assist you today?" Blake's voice was warm, inviting. "Excuse me," Harold said gently. "I believe I was next in line." Blake's gaze reluctantly shifted to Harold, his expression changing so rapidly it would have been comical under different circumstances. The warmth in his eyes cooled to something closer to confusion, then dismissal. "The service entrance is around the back, sir," Blake said, his tone now clipped and professional. "If you're making a delivery, you'll need to check in with security first." Harold maintained his calm. "I'm not making a delivery. I have a reservation. The name is Jenkins, Harold Jenkins." Blake's eyebrows rose fractionally. With visible reluctance, he turned to his computer screen, manicured fingers tapping at the keyboard with unnecessary force. His eyes narrowed as he studied the screen. "There seems to be some mistake," Blake said finally. "I'm not seeing any reservation under that name." His tone implied the mistake wasn't on the hotel's end. Harold reached into his portfolio and extracted a printed confirmation. "I made the reservation 3 weeks ago. Executive suite 2 nights. I received confirmation both by email and post." He slid the paper across the polished counter. Blake barely glanced at the document. "Perhaps you're confused about the hotel? There's a motel just off the highway that might be more." He paused, eyes flicking over Harold's overalls. "Suitable for your needs." From the corner of his eye, Harold noticed a young woman behind the desk frowning slightly at her colleague's behavior. Her name tag read, Sophia Martinez, Guest Relations. "I'm quite certain I have the right hotel," Harold said, his tone remaining pleasant. "Would you mind checking again? Perhaps under my company name, Jenkins Agricultural Innovations." Blake's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, the Grand Plaza caters to a certain clientele. Our executive suites start at $1,500 per night. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about the type of establishment this is." The couple waiting behind Harold exchanged glances, the woman's hand rising to cover her mouth as she whispered something to her companion. Their soft laughter stung more than Blake's dismissal. "Money isn't the issue," Harold said quietly. "I'd just like to check into my room before my meeting with the board this afternoon." "What board would that be?" Blake asked, skepticism evident in every syllable. "That's not really your concern, young man," Harold replied, a hint of steel entering his voice for the first time. "Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd check your system again for my reservation." Blake's expression hardened. "I've checked, sir. There's nothing under your name. Without proper identification and a valid reservation, I cannot provide accommodations. Perhaps you should try somewhere more aligned with your—" He paused meaningfully. Circumstances. By now, several guests in the lobby had paused to observe the interaction. Harold was acutely aware of the eyes on him, the judgments being made based solely on his appearance. A lifetime of work, of building something from nothing, of innovation and perseverance, reduced to a dismissive glance at his overalls. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Harold said calmly. Something like triumph flashed in Blake's eyes. "I am the front office manager, sir, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you continue to disturb our guests." He made a subtle gesture, and Harold noticed a security guard near the entrance shift his position slightly, eyes now focused in their direction. The young woman, Sophia, stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps I could check the system again? Sometimes reservations get misfiled if they're made through certain third-party services." Blake shot her a warning look. "That won't be necessary, Sophia. I've already conducted a thorough search." He turned back to Harold. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist that you vacate the premises. This is a private establishment, and we reserve the right to refuse service." Harold stood his ground, though his shoulders slumped slightly, an old man suddenly looking his age. "I see," he said quietly. "And if I were dressed differently? If I arrived in a luxury car instead of my truck? Would you be so quick to turn me away then?" A flush crept up Blake's neck. "This has nothing to do with your appearance, sir. We simply have no record of your reservation." The lie hung in the air between them, acknowledged by neither but recognized by both. "I understand," Harold said finally. "I'll wait over there while you sort this out." He nodded toward the lobby seating area. "My meeting isn't for a few hours yet." Before Blake could protest further, Harold turned and walked with quiet dignity toward an unoccupied corner of the lobby. He settled into a chair that offered a view of both the front desk and the main entrance, placed his portfolio on his lap, and prepared to wait. Behind him, he could hear Blake's voice, artificially loud, as he welcomed the well-dressed couple with excessive courtesy. "Welcome to the Grand Plaza. How may I make your stay exceptional today?" From across the lobby, the young executives who had mocked him earlier took a photo on a smartphone, snickering among themselves. Harold pretended not to notice. He had faced worse in his lifetime. The soil under his fingernails had fed thousands. The calluses on his hands had built something lasting. He could weather this storm of disdain. By day's end, the truth would emerge as it always did. Until then, Harold Jenkins would wait with the patience of a man who had spent decades watching seeds grow into harvests. Time moved differently for a man who had spent his life watching seasons change. Harold Jenkins settled into the uncomfortable lobby chair, positioning himself to observe the comings and goings of the Grand Plaza Hotel. The leather portfolio remained on his lap, one weathered hand resting protectively upon it. The elegant clock above the reception desk showed 11:17 a.m. His meeting with the board wasn't scheduled until 3 p.m., but he had hoped to rest and prepare in his room beforehand. The lobby's activity ebbed and flowed around him. Well-heeled guests arrived in waves, each receiving Blake Thompson's practiced smile and efficient service. Business travelers with polished shoes and pressed suits. Tourists in casual luxury wear, weighted down with designer shopping bags. Each was welcomed warmly, each treated with the deference Harold had been denied. By noon, Harold's back had begun to ache from the ornamental chair clearly designed for appearance rather than comfort. He shifted position, catching Sophia's eye as she emerged from behind the reception desk. She hesitated, then approached with a tentative smile. "Would you like some water, sir?" she asked quietly, glancing back toward Blake, who was occupied with another guest. "That would be kind, thank you," Harold replied. She returned moments later with a crystal glass of ice water. "I'm sorry about earlier," she whispered. "I checked the system again. Your reservation is there, but it's been flagged with some kind of hold. I can't override it without Mr. Thompson's approval." Harold nodded his understanding. "Don't trouble yourself on my account. I've waited for more important things in my time." Sophia hesitated. "Your meeting? Is it really with the board of directors?" "It is indeed," Harold confirmed, "though I'm beginning to wonder if that information was deliberately kept from certain staff members." The young woman's eyes widened slightly. Before she could respond, Blake's sharp voice cut across the lobby. "Sophia, we need you at the desk immediately." With an apologetic glance, she hurried away. Blake's eyes followed her, then shifted to Harold with undisguised suspicion before returning to his duties. 12:45 p.m. The lobby had grown busier as the lunch hour brought an influx of local business people to the hotel's renowned restaurant. The scent of gourmet cuisine wafted through the air, reminding Harold that he hadn't eaten since his pre-dawn breakfast. His stomach growled quietly, but he made no move toward the restaurant. He wouldn't give Blake the satisfaction of seeing him rejected again. Harold observed a hotel employee approaching guests in the lobby, offering complimentary champagne to enhance their Grand Plaza experience. The young man carefully avoided Harold's corner, making a deliberate detour to serve a couple who had arrived well after him. A family with 2 young children entered, the parents dressed in casual but clearly expensive clothing. The little boy, perhaps 7 years old, broke free from his mother's grasp and ran directly toward Harold's corner, fascinated by something outside the window near his chair. "Look, Mom, that's a John Deere 8R series tractor, the new one with the autonomous guidance system." The boy's eyes were bright with excitement as he pointed at a promotional display in the adjacent courtyard. Harold couldn't help but smile. "You know your farm equipment, young man." The boy turned, beaming. "My grandpa has a farm. He lets me ride in the combine sometimes." "Tommy," the boy's mother appeared, face tense with embarrassment. "Don't bother the gentleman." She grabbed her son's hand, pulling him away with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, not to Harold but to the air around him, as if apologizing to the hotel itself for her son's interaction with someone so clearly out of place. "No bother at all, ma'am," Harold said quietly, but she was already steering her son toward the check-in desk, whispering something in his ear that made the child look back with confusion. 1:30 p.m. Harold's legs needed stretching. He stood carefully, tucking his portfolio under his arm, and walked toward the public restrooms in the far corner of the lobby. As he passed the front desk, he noticed Blake watching him with barely concealed satisfaction, as if Harold's apparent discomfort validated his earlier dismissal. In the elegant marble restroom, Harold splashed cold water on his face and studied his reflection in the mirror. The man who looked back at him had earned every line on his face, every gray hair, every callus on his hands. Harold straightened his shoulders, smoothed his clean but worn work shirt, and reminded himself of what his father had taught him. True dignity came from within, not from external trappings. When he returned to the lobby, he found his seat had been taken by a group of laughing executives who had pulled several chairs together for an impromptu meeting. His glass of water was gone. Harold glanced around, finding only a single vacant seat near the entrance, beside a decorative plant that partially obscured the view of the reception desk. As he made his way toward it, he passed Blake, who was escorting an elegantly dressed couple toward the elevators. "Your penthouse suite is ready, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds," Blake was saying. "I've taken the liberty of upgrading you as valued platinum members." Harold settled into his new seat, the leather portfolio still secure under his arm. The seat's position near the revolving doors meant a constant draft of cool air and the noise of traffic from outside. 2:15 p.m. Less than an hour until his meeting. He should be preparing, reviewing his notes, not sitting in a lobby like an unwelcome intruder. A new shift of staff had appeared behind the reception desk, but Blake remained, now speaking in low tones to the newcomers while occasionally glancing in Harold's direction. The message was clear. The old man in overalls was to be watched but not served. "Excuse me." The voice belonged to a middle-aged woman in a hotel uniform more formal than those of the reception staff. Her gold name badge identified her as Andrea Lawson, Guest Experience Manager. "Sir, are you waiting for someone?" Harold looked up at her, noting the practiced smile that didn't quite mask the wariness in her eyes. "In a manner of speaking, I'm waiting to check into my room." Andrea's smile remained fixed. "I see. And have you spoken with our front desk staff?" "I have indeed," Harold replied. "Rather unsuccessfully, I'm afraid. The young man there, Blake, seems to believe I don't belong in this establishment." Andrea's eyes flicked toward the reception desk, where Blake was watching their interaction with unveiled interest. "I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding. Our policy is that the lobby seating is reserved for registered guests only." Harold met her gaze steadily. "That's a reasonable policy. I would be a registered guest if your staff would process my reservation." Something in his calm dignity gave Andrea pause. "Perhaps I could assist you. What name is the reservation under?" "Harold Jenkins." Andrea excused herself and approached the front desk. Harold watched as Blake spoke to her in animated whispers, gesturing occasionally in his direction. Andrea's expression remained professional, but her posture grew increasingly rigid as their conversation continued. She returned moments later. "Mr. Jenkins, I apologize, but I'm told there appears to be no reservation under your name. If you'd like to make a new booking, I'd be happy to check availability, though I should mention our rooms start at $1,500 per night for an executive suite. Yes, I've been informed, Harold finished for her. Ms. Lawson, I have a confirmed reservation. I also have a meeting with the board of directors at 3 p.m. in your main conference room. I would appreciate being allowed to wait here until then. Doubt flickered across Andrea's face. You have a meeting with our board? That's correct. The Luxon Hospitality Group Board of Directors? The very same. Andrea hesitated, uncertainty now evident in her expression. Sir, the board only meets with significant shareholders and potential investors. Are you representing someone? You could say that, Harold replied mildly. Before Andrea could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of men and women in impeccable business attire had entered the hotel, their presence commanding immediate notice from the staff. Blake rushed forward, practically tripping over himself to greet them. 2:45 p.m. Harold recognized several faces from his research, board members arriving early for the meeting. He remained seated, watching as they were escorted toward the conference center with excessive deference. None glanced in his direction or showed any sign of recognizing him. Why would they? The photograph he'd provided had been taken 15 years ago at Margaret's insistence. Harold in his one and only suit, his hair still more pepper than salt, his face less weathered by time. Andrea had disappeared, presumably to verify Harold's claims about the board meeting. Blake remained at the reception desk, occasionally casting suspicious glances toward Harold's corner. Twice more, guests were seated in the lobby area without being questioned about their registration status. The elegant clock now showed 2:55 p.m. Harold stood, gathering his portfolio, and began walking toward the conference center. As expected, Blake immediately intercepted him, positioning himself directly in Harold's path. Sir, I need to ask you to leave the premises now, Blake said, his voice low but firm. You've been in our lobby for nearly 4 hours without being a registered guest. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to call security. Harold met the younger man's gaze without flinching. My meeting begins in 5 minutes. I suggest you step aside. There is no meeting, Blake insisted, color rising in his cheeks. This charade has gone on long enough. Around them, guests had begun to notice the confrontation. Harold was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the phones discreetly raised to capture the moment when the shabby old man in overalls would be escorted from the premises. Young man, Harold said quietly, in my 72 years, I've learned that appearances can be deceiving. I've been judged by my coveralls and my calluses my entire life. Right now, you're making a judgment that you'll come to regret very shortly. Blake's face hardened. Security, he called, raising his hand to summon the uniformed guard who had been hovering nearby for the past hour. The guard approached, hand resting lightly on his radio. Is there a problem here, Mr. Thompson? Please escort this gentleman from the property, Blake instructed, a note of triumph in his voice. He's been loitering and disturbing our guests. Harold Jenkins stood tall, his worn boots planted firmly on the imported marble floor, the portfolio containing proof of his ownership clutched in his weathered hands. The clock struck 3 p.m. precisely as the conference room doors opened down the hallway. The moment of revelation had arrived. The conference room doors swung open, revealing a well-appointed space where 12 people sat around a gleaming mahogany table. At the head stood Victoria Reynolds, CEO of Luxon Hospitality Group and chairwoman of the board. Tall and commanding in her tailored suit, she stepped into the hallway, clipboard in hand. Has anyone seen our new majority shareholder? Mr. Jenkins was supposed to. Victoria's gaze landed on the tableau before her. Harold in his worn overalls, flanked by Blake and the security guard. Her sentence died mid-word. For a heartbeat, the scene froze. Blake's triumphant expression began to falter as Victoria's eyes widened in recognition. Mr. Jenkins? Victoria's voice carried down the hallway, drawing the attention of everyone in the lobby. She strode forward, hand extended. Harold Jenkins?
I'm Victoria Reynolds.
We spoke on the phone last week. I've been looking forward to meeting you in person. Harold took her offered hand with a gentle firmness. Ms. Reynolds, pleasure. I apologize for not introducing myself earlier. There seems to have been some confusion about my reservation. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes darted to Blake, who had gone pale. Confusion? I personally confirmed your executive suite was prepared. What seems to be the problem? Blake took a half step backward. Ms. Reynolds, there must be some mistake. This man has been loitering in our lobby claiming to have a reservation, but the system shows nothing under his name. Victoria's expression hardened. Mr. Thompson, this is Harold Jenkins, the new majority shareholder of Luxon Hospitality Group and owner of 60% of this hotel. His reservation was made 3 weeks ago under the VIP protocol. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, the hushed conversations in the lobby ceased. The security guard's hand dropped from his radio. Blake's face drained of all color, leaving him ashen under the lobby's crystal chandeliers. I don't understand, Blake stammered. There was nothing in the system. Then you didn't look properly, Victoria said sharply. Or perhaps you saw exactly what you expected to see, a name without a face. From within the conference room, a distinguished older gentleman in an impeccable suit appeared. Victoria, we should begin. The quarterly numbers. He stopped, noticing Harold. Unlike Blake, his reaction was immediate recognition. Harold Jenkins, the irrigation system's pioneer. Your drought-resistant farming techniques saved my family's vineyard in Sonoma. He stepped forward, hand extended. Richard Kensington, I followed your work for decades. Harold shook his hand warmly. Mr. Kensington, your Cabernet Sauvignon is exceptional. I keep a bottle for special occasions. One by one, board members emerged into the hallway, drawn by the commotion. To Blake's visible shock, each greeted Harold with genuine respect. These titans of industry, these powerful figures in tailored suits worth more than Blake's monthly salary, treated the man in overalls as a peer. I apologize for the delay, Harold said to the assembled board. I've been experiencing some hospitality challenges. Victoria's expression could have frozen flame. Mr. Thompson, she said, not looking at Blake but addressing him nonetheless. Please see me in my office immediately after I escort Mr. Jenkins to his suite. She turned to Harold. Unless you'd prefer to start our meeting first? The suite can wait, Harold replied. I've been sitting in your lobby for nearly 4 hours. A comfortable conference room chair sounds heavenly about now. As the board members began returning to the conference room, Blake finally found his voice. Sir, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If you'll allow me to personally escort you after your meeting, I'll ensure your stay is... That won't be necessary, Victoria interrupted. Andrea will handle Mr. Jenkins' check-in personally. She nodded to the guest experience manager, who had reappeared, her face a mask of professional horror at what had transpired. Harold paused, studying Blake's stricken expression. The young man seemed to have aged years in minutes. His carefully cultivated confidence shattered. Actually, Harold said quietly, I'd appreciate a word with Mr. Thompson before our meeting begins. Privately. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. Of course, you can use the small meeting room across the hall. We'll wait for you. The board members disappeared into the conference room, while Victoria directed Blake and Harold to a smaller space nearby. As the door closed behind them, leaving the two men alone, Blake seemed to physically shrink. Mr. Jenkins, I cannot begin to express how deeply I regret my behavior. If I had known, Harold raised a weathered hand. That's precisely the problem, isn't it? If you had known. Tell me, young man, what would you have known that would have changed your treatment of me? Blake swallowed hard. That you're the majority shareholder. That you're important. And that's the only thing that would make me worthy of basic courtesy? My financial standing? Harold's voice remained gentle, but his eyes held Blake's with unwavering intensity. No, sir, of course not, Blake stammered. It's just your appearance. We have protocols for judging people based on their clothing? Harold finished for him. For determining human worth by the dirt beneath their fingernails? Blake had no answer. Harold sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. I grew up poor. Dirt poor, as we used to say. My father worked himself to death by 52, trying to keep our small farm afloat during the worst drought in a century. Every callus on these hands, every wrinkle on this face, every thread in these overalls represents years of struggle, innovation, and eventually, success. He opened his portfolio and removed a document, sliding it across the small table. This is my reservation confirmation. I printed it out because I've learned over the years that sometimes being right isn't enough. Sometimes you need proof. People like me always need proof. Blake stared at the paper, the VIP booking details clearly visible. Do you know why I bought controlling interest in this hotel chain, Mr. Thompson? Harold asked. Blake shook his head mutely. Because luxury shouldn't be exclusive to those who look the part. True luxury, true service, should be about how you treat every human being who walks through your doors. Harold gestured to his overalls. I dress this way by choice now, not necessity. These clothes are comfortable. They remind me of who I am and where I came from. He leaned forward slightly. But many people dress this way because it's all they can afford. They save for years to spend one night in a place like this for an anniversary or a special celebration. And when they finally walk through those doors, they're met with the same contempt you showed me today. Blake's eyes dropped to the floor. I understand, sir. I'll clear out my office immediately. Is that what you think I want? To fire you? Harold asked. Blake looked up, confusion evident on his face. Isn't it? Harold shook his head slowly. Firing you would be easy. It would also ensure you learned nothing except to fear powerful people regardless of how they're dressed. That's not the lesson here. He stood, gathering his portfolio. No, Mr. Thompson. I don't want your job. I want your understanding. And beginning tomorrow, I want your help implementing a new training program for every Luxon property. One that focuses on recognizing the dignity in every guest, regardless of appearance. Blake stared at him, disbelief evident in his expression. You're giving me a chance to fix this? I believe in second chances, son. I've needed a few myself over the years. Harold moved toward the door, then paused. But make no mistake, I will be watching how you handle this opportunity. The board meeting I'm about to attend includes a review of management personnel. He offered a small smile. Appearances can be deceiving. Remember that. As they exited the small meeting room, the lobby had returned to its normal activity, though many guests still cast curious glances in their direction. The story of the farmer who owned the hotel was already spreading in whispers and sidelong glances. Victoria Reynolds waited outside the conference room, her expression carefully neutral. Is everything resolved to your satisfaction, Mr. Jenkins? Not yet, Harold replied. But I believe it will be, given time and the right approach. He glanced at Blake. Mr. Thompson will be heading a new initiative I'd like to discuss during our meeting. Blake stood straighter, his expression a complex mixture of relief, disbelief, and something approaching respect. Your suite will be ready immediately after your meeting, Mr. Jenkins. I've personally seen to it. Harold nodded and followed Victoria into the conference room, where the board members waited expectantly. As the door closed behind them, whispers erupted throughout the lobby. The legend of Harold Jenkins, the farmer who owned the Grand Plaza, had been born a story that would transform not just one hotel, but an entire hospitality empire's approach to understanding true worth beneath surface appearances. 3 weeks passed before Harold Jenkins returned to the Grand Plaza. This time, he arrived exactly as before in his worn work boots and comfortable overalls, driving his 15-year-old pickup truck. The only difference was his expectation of what would happen when he walked through those gleaming revolving doors. The lobby looked the same, marble floors still gleaming, crystal chandeliers still sparkling, fresh flowers still perfuming the air. Yet something had changed, something less tangible but no less real. Harold noticed it immediately as he approached the front desk. Blake Thompson stood in his usual position, immaculately dressed in his hotel uniform. But when he looked up and saw Harold, his reaction was nothing like their first encounter. His eyes showed recognition, not dismissal. His posture straightened, not with the artificial formality he'd shown to wealthy guests, but with what appeared to be genuine respect. Mr. Jenkins, Blake said, stepping forward to greet him. Welcome back to the Grand Plaza. It's good to see you again. Harold studied the young man's face, looking for any trace of the condescension he'd displayed during their first meeting. He found none. Either Blake had become an exceptional actor in the intervening weeks, or something had genuinely shifted in his perspective. Mr. Thompson, Harold replied with a nod. I trust everything has been running smoothly in my absence? Very smoothly, sir. If you have a moment, I'd be happy to update you on the initiatives we discussed. Blake gestured toward the seating area, the same corner where Harold had waited for hours during his previous visit. This time, the experience was markedly different. A comfortable chair had replaced the ornamental one Harold had occupied before. A young staff member appeared almost immediately with a glass of water and a small plate of refreshments. Our chef remembered you mentioned enjoying freshly baked sourdough, Blake explained, noticing Harold's surprised expression. He prepared these specifically when we received word you were arriving today. Harold accepted the small offering with a thoughtful nod. You've been anticipating my return. Yes, sir. Your visit last month changed things around here. Blake's voice had lost its polished veneer, revealing something more authentic beneath. Not just for me, for all of us. As if on cue, Sophia Martinez approached, her smile genuine as she greeted Harold. Mr. Jenkins, it's wonderful to see you again. The updates to our welcome procedures have been fully implemented across all departments. Would you like to see the training materials we've developed? Harold set aside his sourdough. I would indeed. But first, I'd like to observe for a while if you don't mind. He gestured toward the lobby. I'm curious to see these changes in action. Over the next hour, Harold watched the daily operations of the Grand Plaza with the same patient attention he'd once devoted to monitoring irrigation patterns across his fields. What he saw both pleased and intrigued him. A family entered tourists clearly on a budget, their clothing practical rather than fashionable, their luggage worn but serviceable. Under the old regime, they might have received perfunctory service at best. Instead, Blake himself greeted them warmly, ensuring their children received the same welcome cookies offered to the offspring of wealthy guests. An elderly woman in a simple dress approached the concierge desk with questions about local bus routes rather than private car services. Instead of the barely concealed impatience Harold might have expected, the concierge produced a detailed map, circled several stops, and even called the transit authority to confirm the schedule. Most telling was the arrival of a young man in paint-splattered work clothes. Clearly a contractor arrived to provide an estimate for some hotel maintenance. Rather than being directed to a service entrance, he was greeted professionally and escorted to his appointment by a staff member who engaged him in pleasant conversation along the way. Blake returned to where Harold sat observing. We're ready in the conference room whenever you are, sir. Harold rose, following Blake through the lobby toward the same conference room where the board meeting had been held. As they walked, Harold noticed subtle changes in how staff interacted with guests, less fawning over the obviously wealthy, more genuine attention to everyone regardless of appearance. The conference room had been prepared with care. Victoria Reynolds was already present, along with Andrea Lawson and several staff members Harold didn't recognize. On the wall, a projection displayed what appeared to be training materials titled Beyond Appearances, the new Grand Plaza Experience. Mr. Jenkins, Victoria greeted him. I believe you'll be pleased with what Blake has accomplished in a remarkably short time. Blake stepped forward, and Harold noticed something different about the young man's demeanor. The polished artifice had been replaced by something more substantial, a genuine confidence rather than the hollow arrogance he'd displayed before. After our conversation, I spent some time reflecting on my behavior. Blake began. Not just with you, but with countless guests I've judged based solely on appearances. The realization was uncomfortable. He gestured to the materials displayed on the wall. We've completely revamped our training procedures. Every staff member, from housekeeping to management, now undergoes a new orientation program focused on recognizing unconscious bias and practicing genuine hospitality. Andrea stepped forward. We've implemented what we call the Jenkins Protocol, a series of service standards designed to ensure every guest receives equal treatment, regardless of appearance or perceived status. Harold raised an eyebrow. The Jenkins Protocol? Blake looked slightly embarrassed. The name stuck after we shared your story during the first training session. It's become something of a shorthand among staff. Remember, the Jenkins Protocol means don't judge by appearances. Harold wasn't entirely comfortable having his name attached to the initiative, but he recognized the value of a compelling story in driving cultural change. And how has the staff responded? With surprising enthusiasm, Victoria said. It turns out many of our employees had experienced similar judgments in their own lives. Your story resonated deeply. Blake nodded. We've also implemented practical changes, removing the term suitable from our vocabulary when discussing guests, eliminating dress codes except in specific restaurant venues, and training staff to recognize their own biases. He hesitated before continuing. We've also begun tracking and measuring our success. Guest satisfaction scores have increased across all demographics, but particularly among those who might not fit the traditional luxury hotel guest profile. Harold listened, impressed despite his initial skepticism. And the board's reaction?
Victoria smiled.
Quarterly revenue is up 5%. despite initial concerns that our exclusive image might be diluted. It turns out treating every guest with dignity is not only the right thing to do, it's good business. As the presentation continued, Harold realized that what he was witnessing wasn't merely a superficial change implemented to placate a powerful shareholder. Something more fundamental had shifted within the culture of the Grand Plaza, sparked by his experience but carried forward by people who had recognized the truth in the lesson. After the formal presentation concluded, Blake asked if Harold would address the assembled staff. Somewhat reluctantly, Harold agreed, finding himself facing a room full of employees from every department, from the doormen who had once judged him by his truck to the housekeepers who prepared rooms for guests they rarely saw. "I'm not one for speeches," Harold began, his voice carrying the straightforward cadence of a man more accustomed to fields than boardrooms. "Throughout my life, I've been judged by these overalls and these calloused hands. Some saw only a simple farmer, never bothering to look deeper." He surveyed the room, meeting the eyes of those who now hung on his every word. "What happened to me in your lobby isn't unique. Every day, people are assessed, categorized, and dismissed based on their appearance. The suit that costs thousands, the designer handbag, the luxury vehicle, these have become shorthand for determining who deserves respect and attention." Harold gestured to his worn work boots. "These boots have walked through fields that feed thousands. These hands have built innovations that changed agricultural practices across 3 continents. This mind," he tapped his temple, "has solved problems that experts said were unsolvable. None of that is visible when I walk through your doors." The room was silent, every face attentive. True hospitality isn't about fawning over wealth or status. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity in every person who enters your establishment. It's about understanding that the worth of a human being can't be measured by the price of their clothing or the model of their car. Harold turned to Blake. "Mr. Thompson has taken a difficult lesson and transformed it into something valuable. That takes courage and character. I'm not here to embarrass him by rehashing our first meeting, but to acknowledge the work he's done since then." Blake's expression showed genuine gratitude as Harold continued. "The changes you've implemented here aren't just about making one old farmer feel welcome. They're about creating an environment where genuine hospitality, not the appearance of it, becomes your standard. That's something worth building, worth protecting, and worth expanding." As Harold concluded his brief remarks, the staff responded with heartfelt applause. Several approached him afterward, sharing stories of their own experiences with judgment based on appearance, both as recipients and, sometimes reluctantly, as perpetrators. Later, as Blake escorted Harold to his suite, the same executive suite he had been denied during his first visit, the transformation in the young man was unmistakable. "I want to thank you," Blake said as they walked, "not just for the second chance, but for the lesson. I've spent my career cultivating an image of sophistication and exclusivity, believing that's what luxury hospitality required. I never realized how much that mindset cost us, and cost me in terms of our humanity." Harold considered the young man thoughtfully. "The true measure of change isn't in policies or protocols, Mr. Thompson. It's in moments when no one is watching. It's in how you treat the person you believe can do nothing for you or to you." Blake nodded. "I understand that now, and I'm trying to live it, not just at work, but in my personal life as well." He smiled slightly. "My neighbors, the maintenance man and his family I used to avoid in the elevator, we had dinner together last week. Turns out he's a chess master who's competed internationally. I never would have known if I hadn't started actually seeing him as a person." As they reached the suite, Blake handed Harold the keycard. "We've prepared everything according to your preferences, and I want you to know, I'm grateful for what you've taught us, what you've taught me." Harold accepted the key with a nod. "Change is rarely comfortable, son, but discomfort often precedes growth." As Blake departed, Harold entered the suite, spacious, luxurious, and prepared with thoughtful attention to detail. On the table sat a small model of an irrigation system he had designed decades ago, alongside a handwritten note from Victoria. "Sometimes the most valuable innovations aren't in technology, but in how we see each other. Thank you for helping us see more clearly." Harold Jenkins, the farmer who owned the Grand Plaza, smiled as he set down his overnight bag. The transformation he'd witnessed wasn't just in hotel protocols or staff behavior. It was in the recognition that true dignity comes not from external trappings, but from the fundamental worth each person carries within themselves, a lesson worth more than all the luxury hotels in the world. 6 months later, Harold Jenkins stood in the lobby of the Grand Plaza, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, but something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere of the place. It wasn't just the Jenkins Protocol plaque discreetly mounted near the entrance, or the training manuals that now included his story as a case study in unconscious bias. It was the lived reality of the transformation. A farmer much like himself, weathered hands, practical clothing, soil-stained boots, was being checked in with genuine warmth by a front desk agent. Nearby, a celebrity in designer sunglasses received the same level of service. No more, no less. The hierarchy of human worth based on appearance had been dismantled, replaced by a recognition of the inherent dignity in every guest who walked through those doors. Blake Thompson approached, his demeanor now balanced between professional and authentically human. "The quarterly numbers came in," he said, handing Harold a folder. "Revenue up 12%, guest satisfaction at an all-time high." Harold glanced at the figures, but his attention was drawn to a note paperclipped to the report, a handwritten letter from a guest, describing how they had saved for years to spend one night at the Grand Plaza for their 50th anniversary. They had arrived in their best clothes, still modest by luxury standards, expecting to be treated as outsiders. Instead, they had experienced genuine hospitality that made them feel valued and welcomed. "This," Harold said, tapping the letter, "is the true measure of our success." Blake nodded, understanding. "You showed us that luxury isn't about exclusivity or appearances. True luxury is treating every person with dignity and respect." As Harold prepared to leave, he paused at the revolving doors, taking in the scene one final time. The journey from discrimination to transformation had created ripples extending far beyond one elderly farmer in a fancy hotel lobby. The Luxon Hospitality Group was implementing the Jenkins Protocol across all their properties worldwide. Other hotel chains were beginning to take notice and follow suit. Change, Harold reflected, often began with small moments, a slight, a dismissal, a judgment based on appearances. But transformation could begin the same way, with one person willing to see beyond coveralls and work boots to the human being underneath. Harold Jenkins stepped through the revolving doors, back into the world that had once judged him by his appearance rather than his worth. But now, he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that in one small corner of that world, the standard had been forever changed.